Although estimates vary, research shows that large numbers of youth in justice settings have learning or related disabilities, making them eligible for special education services and supports. Youth with special education needs, when compared to their peers without disabilities, experience greater educational, social, and behavioral challenges. These challenges can be even more pronounced for youth involved with the justice system. Additionally, justice facilities and their schools often face challenges in fully meeting the academic, behavioral, and related needs of these young people. This N&D InFocus program, from the National Evaluation and Technical Assistance Center for the Education of Children and Youth who are neglected, delinquent, or at risk, will explore the unique needs of youth with learning and related disabilities and the ways in which justice facilities and their schools support the success of these youth. To help us understand a little more about this population of youth and their experiences in the justice system, we're pleased to be joined by Drs. David Houchins and Candace Mulcahy. Dr. Houchins is a professor in the Department of Education Psychology, Special Education, and Communication Disorders at Georgia State University. His areas of interest include juvenile justice reform and academic strategies, and transition services for at-risk youth with and without disabilities. Dr. Houchins, welcome to the program.
Well, thank you for letting me be here. I look forward to it.
Dr. Mulcahy is an associate professor in the Graduate School of Education at Binghamton University in New York. Her work is focused on education policies and practices in alternative and segregated settings, including the juvenile delinquency system, as well as teacher preparation for students at risk and reading, writing, and mathematics interventions for students at risk. Dr. Mulcahy, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
So Dr. Houchins, let's start with you. You obviously know the population of students with disabilities, those receiving or in need of special education services, pretty well. So from your experience, what are some of the typical characteristics, if you will, of this population?
Well, in general, youth with disabilities, there's a broad range of types of disabilities, from learning disabilities to emotional disabilities to physical disabilities. So the characteristics are different within each of those populations, but on an average, most students are often at least 1 to 2 grade levels below their peers in reading, in math. More so, the greatest issue is probably within reading and literacy issues. Of course, if kids with emotional and behavioral disabilities, those are ones who have more either behavioral problems or mental health issues that impede their learning. So their, in that case, their IQ and ability levels are supposed to be on par. Their ability could be on par, but their actual functioning is much lower. So, and in most cases, students who are incarcerated or delinquent or detained are students who have either a learning disability, an emotional and behavioral disability, and some intellectual disabilities typically. But there's a wide range of disabilities within a juvenile justice setting that are similar to what happens in a typical school. There's just a larger portion within a juvenile justice kind of setting.
So looking a little more closely at these youth with disabilities within justice and other segregated settings, Dr. Mulcahy, what has the educational situation typically been for them leading up to and during their system involvement?
So these students typically come to the facilities with long histories of school failure and gaps in their educational histories. So they have been in and out of schools. They've transferred from school to school. Many of them, about 30 to 60%, depending on who runs the study and which states they're looking at, have special ed diagnoses or identifications and have previously received special ed services. High rates of these students come to facilities with mental health and other behavioral and social emotional issues. They've had long histories of school suspensions and expulsions. And what I think is really important, there are 2 points, is that many of these kids haven't been identified. So they're coming to the facilities and they've got these histories. They may have histories of toxic stress and trauma in their homes, in their schools, in their communities, and yet they're not identified. So that's one major issue. And then the other issue is that many of these students most of them, if not all of them, are very cognizant of their deficits and recognize that they haven't been successful in schools, and they also recognize the importance of reading and math and success in school for their futures. But they've had so much history of failure that they tend to think that they are unable to be successful.
And I would imagine that these youth in particular pose some real challenges for the staff within the facilities and schools. Is that correct?
I think that each student is going to bring their own individual needs. The problem with kind of looking at students with disabilities versus students without disabilities in that setting is that there are so many kids in those settings that haven't been identified but do truly have the special ed needs or social emotional needs. And many of the kids who have been identified may have just been, a lot of their issues may have been due to kind of lack of schooling or poor schooling up to that point. If a student is out of school and has high rates of absences and truancies for several years, or has been moved around from school to school to school because of the special ed process or because of living situations, there's such a lack of education services in general in their history that looking at kind of comparing kids with disabilities and kids without disabilities is hard to do. I do think that in general, if the student has an IEP or the child find process is used in a juvenile facility, then and they've been identified with a disability, then they need to get the special ed services that they require, and that, of course, would make that a difference between their peers that don't have an identified disability.
So, to the extent we can focus on youth with disabilities, those we know need or have received special education services in the past, how different is it serving those students in justice settings than it is in a regular community school?
It's a large difference in the sense that the setting is primarily, and the main purpose is logical, is to have some kind of emphasis on security. So facilities or school settings, it's kind of better to say that they are schools within, juvenile justice facilities, are dictated by the security or the level of risk that individuals or the students have in those settings. So the difficulty is that while security is obviously is a primary concern, when many facilities being smaller, it's more difficult to provide a lot of the educational services. It makes it more complex, I should say, because there's a greater level of heterogeneity within a juvenile justice facility. So you have students who are functioning at, first grade level all the way up to functioning on grade level. And that may be within a small facility. It could be a large facility too, but typically facilities of the size of, around 100, 150 or so could have that wide range of heterogeneity of ability levels, particularly within literacy, being as an example, or any academic. And then that means that the teachers who are there may be a handful of teachers who are meeting their particular needs. It's difficult to be able to meet those particular diverse needs in a specialized and specific way. And that even becomes more complex when you have kids with disabilities. So even if they're able to get a wide range of programming that hits the vast majority of students, there are still needs that how do you integrate some more of the specialized, more tier 2 or 3 in a RTI kind of perspective, those strategies, particularly for kids who need those particular strategies in literacy, or any academics. So, and I don't think we know a lot of information about how to actually, and I probably don't know even within a typical school, how to really do a really good job of taking what we know about special education and integrating it within a general education setting to meet students' needs, education.
Anything to add to that, Dr. Mulcahy?
I think that secure care facilities and other segregated settings that are not secure care, but where kids are court-ordered or there because they've been kind of pushed out of public schools, they have the promise and the opportunity to really provide state-of-the-art, innovative education services that are integrated with social, emotional, and mental health services. There is a huge potential there for them to make an impact on kids' lives that other places have not been able to, and you've got this rapt, captive audience that you can really work with. The problem is that many facilities aren't able to do that or are not doing that for a number of reasons. Some that are kind of logistically rooted issues, some that are issues with the structure of the facility and how it's run, some due to location of the facility. Many of the facilities, particularly in upstate New York, are in rural settings or away from other things where kind of collaborations and links to services are difficult, or sharing of services across facilities are difficult. So those kind of create barriers. But I think that there's a real opportunity there, and the goal of these facilities and schools is to provide rehabilitative care. The problem is that most, or maybe not most, but many, I hate to say most because without data to support it, but many, many, many facilities struggle to do that and also have practices that are actually contrary to that rehabilitative goal.
Now, you've both already alluded to this, but obviously teachers and other educators and even security staff may struggle to fully understand the needs of these youth and find the ways to address them successfully in the facility and classroom setting. So, Dr. Mulcahy, you've worked as part of monitoring teams that were brought in to address educational issues within justice and other secure care facilities. What have you seen to be the biggest struggles these facilities and schools within the facilities face in terms of meeting the needs of these students?
Well, the things that I primarily look at have to do with special ed services, but special ed is in the context of all of these other things going on. So curriculum and instruction is key. You can't have special education services if your general education services are not or less than adequate. And I would hope that they're ideal because, again, we've got these kids in a setting that we can really make a difference in their lives and improve upon their lives. So let's take every opportunity to do that and take it really seriously. So, curriculum instruction and having content area, rigorous instruction that is really applied and hands-on for kids is really important. So I look for that first. And then I also look at, so what is different for these students with identified disabilities? What is the special educator's role? Where are they pulling kids out? A lot of times I'll go into a facility and my colleagues will go into facilities and we'll hear that, oh, well, because it's a small classroom and it's really individualized, everyone's getting special ed services. Well, that's not actually the case in most of the instances I go and see. It's usually some packet work or because of the nature of how the facility is set up, you've got several different kind of classes going on at once in one classroom. So you've got a kid who needs U.S. history, a kid who needs world history, and a kid who needs state government, and they're all taking the same class in one setting. And the teacher's kind of just going around or giving them packets, or they're doing something that is totally unrelated to all three of those things. So, or loosely related to those things. So that has to change. And that, again, sometimes goes beyond what the teachers can do because they work with what they're given in the classroom. But that's where some of these kind of partnerships with community agencies or with other facilities to kind of share services or using technology. I think technology holds a lot of promise for these facilities. So that's an issue, just kind of general ed in general. But then special ed services, I look to see that, what's different for these kids. What do their IEPs look like? Are they getting the services that are in their IEPs? And if everyone in the facility with an IEP has the same services, that's troubling to me because now we've lost that individualization, and it would be hard to believe that every student coming from all over the state or wherever they're coming from has the same needs as the person next to them. So looking at those services and then looking at the transition services within that. Also related to all of this is behavior management and supports for social-emotional learning and mental health supports. So again, you can't have quality special ed services without these other things going on. And so I really admire and kind of commend facilities who have figured out ways to integrate the social emotional learning, the mental health supports, the behavioral supports with the education services, so that it's not each thing working in a vacuum, that they're kind of integrated. You're not pulling kids out in the middle of the day to do mental health supports and losing that education piece, but you're also not dismissing kids who have mental health needs and keeping them in the classroom when there's an issue going on. I think a real problem in many facilities is this punitive nature of the facilities, where it's supposed to be rehabilitative, but then we have practices like disciplinary confinement and restraint and seclusion. That's problematic, because if your students are not are in disciplinary confinement, they're not in school. And for students with disabilities, they have to be getting education. But what that tends to look like in the facilities I go into, and again, I only go into the ones who, typically I only go into the ones who are troubled or having difficulty and are looking for help or are being told they need to be looking for help. And so, but when you go into disciplinary confinement and you see that kids are working on packet work or are not having access to the same education that their peers in the classroom would be getting or their peers in the public school are getting, that's problematic. So it's a lot of issues, but they're kind of all interrelated.
And Dr. Houchins, what would you add to that in terms of the challenges you've seen for facilities and facility schools?
Well, I think that you could add to the complex needs of the students. There's a lot of complexity. I mean, it's about the student population is just a subpopulation of many perplexing problems that we have in society, I think. About 60% of the youth who are incarcerated have 3 or more comorbid mental health conditions. There's an overrepresentation of those youth who have substance abuse problems. Large populations of them come in with post-traumatic stress disorder related types of issues, primarily related to their home environment or the community aspects. The overrepresentation of conduct disorders and oppositional defiant disorders. And it's kind of a catchphrase of sorts, but a lot of students with attention deficit disorder, with hyperactivity, that, we usually accompanies like anxiety and depression. So those issues are on top of the idea that you also have the educational issues. The complex educational issues, they're usually typically, and it's similar in some regards to typical school of being at least several grade levels behind. But again, it's the idea that the setting is difficult to meet. The access to the general education curriculum is very hard to be able to meet the diverse needs of students. So you have somebody who's been working on 9th grade algebra, and just the simple inability to be able to read word problems, simple inability to read the text can impede getting access to general education, which means getting a general education diploma.
That's right. And these kids, come to the facilities with complex needs, so they require really complex solutions. And it's not easy, it's not straightforward, but I do believe it can be done. And I think if we make this kind of setting a priority across the nation, it will happen.
So taking a moment now to look at some of the things that are working for youth with special education needs and facilities, Dr. Houchins, you've just wrapped up some research into some of the possible academic solutions for these youth within justice settings. Can you tell us a little bit about that work, Project Liberate?
Yeah, Project Liberate, we just finished it not too long ago, and the major focus of the project was, there were several purposes. The major focus was on how to develop the literacy needs of students within a juvenile justice facility and how to meet those particular needs. So originally we'd started out with a program that was much more dealing with direct instruction, and we were in a larger facility that allowed us to do much more homogeneous groupings, so we could have multiple classes, multiple teachers, to get at some of those more specific needs, so we have much more of a tiered level of instruction. Then, and as the year progressed, that became even more complex on being able how to maintain those multiple levels within a very structured program. Then what happened was, unfortunately, that the facility that we were in closed, so we moved to another facility. And in that process, the realization that we're moving to a smaller facility and how to meet really those heterogeneous needs. And the program that we'd had was more of a Tier 2, Tier 3 intervention, so we had to come up with an intervention that was allowed for greater variability and greater heterogeneous education within it. And so we actually ended up using a program which combines whole group instruction, small group instruction, computerized instruction, and individualized instruction. So the kind of the takeaway from that was the need for greater variability within the greater groupings within the class that would allow for students to be able to get the more explicit and direct instruction from their teachers. So the idea being that, the teacher, being the most important individual in the room, has to have those services or programming to provide students when they're in the room when he or she can't necessarily provide the direct instruction group. So you may have students who are on different levels. So, and you usually do with greater heterogeneity of the population. So that program allowed students to flow through those different groupings and still get quality education, explicit instruction. But I think as a takeaway from that, with or without that kind of a program, is the idea that the teacher has to have resources within his or her classroom to be able to have students either working on their instructional level with them and then having the other resources, the computer or the individualized groups reading the books and the such and doing activities that support and reinforce what was taught at the instructional level. So the greatest takeaway is that resources that can have multiple levels of resources within that classroom are important to be able to allow the teacher to provide that explicit instruction that students need to be able to acquire those literacy skills.
Wow, that's exciting work, and I know NDTAC looks forward to learning more about it and to helping facilities and programs really explore the quality practices you've studied. And finally, Dr. Mulcahy, I want to end with you. Since you've helped many facilities and systems address issues with and to improve their special education and related services, what are your suggestions for any jurisdiction out there that wants to take a look at what they're doing for students with disabilities to really make sure that what they're doing meets the needs of this unique population? Where do you suggest they start?
Well, to go back to the things that I've been kind of talking about or pressing as big issues is, so first, look at the IEPs. Take a hard look at the IEPs. When I go into facilities, that's what I do. I look at the IEPs. I look to see what services are recorded. I look to see what hours are recorded. So look at those things and see how they match up and where there might be issues. Make sure that those services are actually being provided and that they're being provided in a meaningful way. and purposeful way. Second, look at the instruction across the board and looking at the education options that are there and that what day-to-day instruction looks like in a classroom. And then look at the behavior management system. And, I'm talking about not just behavior management in the classroom, but across the facility in terms of the security and safety, what the line staff are doing, what the teachers are doing, how that is all integrated, and how that's integrated with mental health and social-emotional supports for these students. Then ask the students. I think that, even when at the university level, in public schools, the student and in juvenile corrections facilities, the students have a lot to say. And they've been in a lot of settings before they've gotten to this setting. And if they know that adults are caring about them and wanting to know what they think about the education they're getting and how it can be improved, that's going a long way to kind of building that rapport and getting kids back engaged with the educational process and interested in succeeding and moving on, which a lot of times they come to the facility and they don't have that. And then finally, really taking a hard look at where you can do interprofessional practices both within the facility and then outside the facility. So within the facility, working with the line staff, the management, the education side, the mental health folks, everybody kind of working together to see how can we provide a real integrated system so that everybody's trained the same way, everybody has the same expectations, and have more positive and proactive beliefs about the kids that they're working with. And then, in some facilities, they're working on using positive behavior interventions and supports, which has kind of been a big push around the nation the last decade. So that's a nice way to start, right? So that's a good way to kind of take a hard look at what's going on and then start integrating and providing kind of universal services. And then outside of the facility, I think accessing local universities and colleges is a big help because there are resources there that can really help you, whether it's through the students and the student organizations or through faculty who have expertise in areas that may be supportive. I would love to get student teachers out into facilities. I think that would be an outstanding thing to do because now we're training teachers who are qualified to work in these settings, but also the facilities are getting people who are learning innovative, state-of-the-art ways of teaching. So let's do that. Let's do things like having social workers in local universities and colleges go in, and then other community organizations. In Delaware, the Ferris School, I'm not sure if they're still doing this, but they had a partnership with DuPont where they would have mentors come into the facility. Employees at DuPont would come in and work with one-on-one with students. We need more of that. That needs to be the norm, not the exception.
Well, Dr. Mulcahy, Dr. Houchin, I want to thank you both for sharing your experiences and insights with us. I know you'll both be back at the end of the program today to address some questions and comments for participants, so we definitely look forward to that. And that's Dr. David Houchins, a professor of education psychology, special education, and communication disorders at Georgia State University, and Dr. Candace Mulcahy, an associate professor in Binghamton University's Graduate School of Education. And now we're going to take a look at one state that has taken steps to assess and address the individual needs of youth, including youth with disabilities, in their juvenile justice facilities, Colorado. Joining us today to share the work that they've been doing are Diane Skufka, the Director of Facility Support for Colorado's Office of Children, Youth, and Families, Dan Balfus, the Director of Zebulon Pike Youth Services Center, and Allison Hansen, Zebulon Pike's principal. And just for a little bit of background, Zebulon Pike is a 36-bed secure treatment facility for young males ages 12 to 20 who have high-risk needs and have committed various crimes, including violent offenses, property crimes, and or sexual offenses. And though it varies, the average length of stay at Zebulon Pike is about 14 to 16 months. But before we hear more about Zebulon Pike, Diane, let's start with you. While we're talking today about youth with special education needs, I want to take a step back and have you give us a sense for how the state of Colorado has worked over the past several years to really take a multifaceted approach to better understanding and meeting the needs of all youth placed in the state's secure care facilities. Could you tell us a little bit about that process?
Sure. Basically, about 5-6 years ago, the Division of Colorado Division of Youth Corrections received funding to support clinical services in all our state facilities. And since that time, we've really worked at integrating those clinical services, our educational services, and our line staff safety and security aspects of our programming all together in different ways. We have developed something called multidisciplinary teams, which basically run the case management for a youth and make all major decisions for a youth's case. Those involve education, floor staff, client managers, clinicians, as well as the youth and family members or natural supports. And again, whenever there's a major decision, those teams of people are brought together or at least consulted as a team and help decide what direction to go with a case. We've also, PBIS, as you may know, or Positive Behavioral Interventions and Supports, relies heavily on a facility-wide effort from all departments, so to speak, of a facility. And currently we're just embarking on use of trauma-informed environments through the implementation of something called the sanctuary model, which again relies on the integration of all elements of the facility in the tools and philosophy of that program.
So Dan, that's how things are set up at the state level. How does that translate into the day-to-day operations at Zebulon Pike?
Well, first of all, Diane did a pretty good job of giving a good overview of that. Taking it down to our facility level, what I would say is the key is to get those three entities working as one, the clinical team, the education team, and the security team. The better they work together with less barriers, the better chance we have of reaching a common goal, which is basically to treat our youth and integrate them back into the community. So the better they work together, the better we can reach that goal.
And Allison, as the school principal, do you see those teams working well together?
Yes, I agree with that. In the school, we have been working very hard in the last year to really collaborate well, especially with the security staff, as that's who we work most closely with, in order to help them build the skills just across all three departments. So whatever we're teaching them in school, it's important that they're also continuing to use those skills and develop those skills when they're back on the unit.
So I'm curious, Dan and Allison, to assist in working together, do the staff in the facility participate in any training together to better understand each other's roles?
Yeah, yes, we do. I think we do a lot of cross-training to include our implementation of our PBIS program, our safety and security practices, to include our youth and staff safety program, suicide prevention monitoring, our special management programs, motivational interviewing. And what we do at our facility is we consider this training also a form of team building, in that we'll combine it with our group life, which is our once-a-month training for all of our staff, where we will not only train our staff, but also use it as an employee recognition program where we celebrate small victories through food and recognition with our staff.
So turning specifically to the population of youth we're focused on today, those with learning and related disabilities in need of special education services, Allison, how do the teams within Zebulon Pike work to meet their specific needs?
Okay, well, we do have a special education teacher, of course, in our facility, in our school, that works with the youth on IEPs. We have an RTI program, so response to intervention, that also helps to identify youth with individual needs, academic deficits. And then as far as, truthfully, when we look at the security staff working in the school and really identifying youth with individual needs, we're looking at behavior. A lot of the youth right now, or all the time, that have significant behavioral issues in school are identified as being, having special education needs because they a lot of times had those same issues in the public school, and that was identified before they came to us. So in those type of actually in all situations, but with the students on IEPs, our special education teacher informs the security staff of any of the needs of these specific students, ways that might work, that they could work best with them, as well as any specific accommodations from the IEP. The special education teacher also works with the security staff to get input for any functional behavior assessments or behavior improvement plans that we might be doing for a specific youth at that time.
And Allison, what's the relationship like with the schools and other placements that Zebulon Pike works with in terms of receiving students and transitioning them out to subsequent placements? How are records like IEPs handled, especially if a youth is diagnosed as needing special education services while he or she is in placement with you?
Okay. When a youth comes in, it's actually our special education coordinator. She also works as a part-time admin, kind of assistant principal type role as well. And she requests any transcripts, student records from any past placements or schools. And then we're able to get information to develop a graduation plan, look at what we need to do for special education needs, things like that. Now, when a youth is getting ready to transition out of the facility, we actually, while they're still in the facility, let me go with that first. We share any IEPs, transcripts, and invite the school districts to all the IEP meetings. So Lori, our special education coordinator, is very involved with the school districts, keeping them informed, collaborating with them throughout their stay here at Zebulon Pike. And then when they are getting ready to leave, I work very closely with the client manager and the school district to determine the best placement for the student. Typically, I call the school district and let them know we have a youth coming back to their home school district. If the youth is on an IEP, I contact the special education department, and then we set up a meeting. And that meeting has the client manager, the parent, the youth, myself, special education coordinator, if that is pertinent, and then the transition coordinator, and then whoever the school district chooses to bring to the meeting. And typically that would be somebody from the special education department for students on IEPs, and maybe an administrator from the school that they're looking at, and possibly a guidance counselor. So we set up a meeting, and then the district sometimes they look at center-based programming for the youth within the district. Sometimes they look at different specialized programs within the public school setting, or sometimes they want to go straight to a day treatment program. So we look at all the different options, and it's very, very important that us as the facility is involved in these discussions, because at these meetings we're able to share any strategies, strengths, needs, any risks that may be involved for this youth. And then the transition coordinator is a really big part of the entire process of transitioning the youth out of the facility back into the community, setting up the youth for success in work, school, home, social, all different areas. And so our transition coordinator comes and is able to start scheduling different community outings, help the youth. If we start a youth back at their public school while they're still finishing up with us, she might coordinate bus passes and transportation for that youth. And so she's a very, very big part of our meetings as well.
And to be clear, for Zebulon Pike, you're working with many different schools, school districts, and other placements, right?
Yeah, we actually coordinate with school districts across the state, typically because a lot of our youth come in from other placements, other facilities, residential treatment facilities, and so there's a few that we see a lot, so we're able to coordinate with them pretty regularly. And then when a youth leaves, they oftentimes go back they might step down to a group home. They may go home on parole. There's different places or different options they may have when they leave here. And most often I've worked with all the different school districts in Colorado Springs, and then some of the surrounding areas, some parts of Denver, Pueblo, Canyon City, and other parts of southern Colorado.
So it sounds like you all have, at least most of the time, I'll assume, some information as to the needs of incoming students with learning and related disabilities. So do the teachers and other education staff receive any special training or professional development specifically focused on working with youth in need of special education services?
Yes, so we have every facility in the division has at least one special education teacher. Most have several. And our facility, we have the one special education coordinator, and then we have a couple of teachers that are working on getting a dual endorsement in special education and their content area. And then they would also be able to help provide services to the youth. Currently, the Division of Youth Corrections is partnering with one of the universities in Denver and is providing online modules for teachers interested in getting their special education endorsement. The director of special education for the division has set up this partnership with them, and the teachers are given online and as well as in-person professional development opportunities to better equip them to serve the needs of our population. And then the teachers are provided continued training within the facility and through outside conferences. And all of my teachers have just completed a semester-long professional development course at one of our neighboring school districts on differentiated instruction. We try to bring in different professional development opportunities on best practice to work with all youth. We do have a wide variety of needs in our classroom. We do have a high population of youth on IEPs, but all of our students have unique educational needs, and so we try to bring in as much training and professional development for our teachers as we can to really prepare them and provide them with tools to work with the youth.
And what about other staff in the facility, maybe the security staff or others?
Well, our staff are trained in the 3-tier PBIS program, and so that, I think, is probably because our security staff works mostly with behavior. That is, and that really did, PBIS is something that has been used in public schools for a very long time, and so they're trained to use PBIS with the Tier 3 interventions, and now we're starting to move slowly into providing Tier 2 interventions as well as Tier 1 interventions. And the security staff are primarily responsible for really processing the timeouts in our school, and we use a RISE processing sheets that ties in with our PBIS behavioral expectations that they've all been trained on, and they're able to teach those expectations through this timeout process, and that really we've been really using that as one of our Tier 2 interventions.
Okay, so we've heard a lot about PBIS, or positive behavioral interventions and supports. Now, there's growing evidence supporting the use of PBIS in secure care settings, but what's the background on you all using it in Colorado? I'm assuming, like for its use in public schools, you all chose PBIS to implement a more consistent behavior management system, one that's also able to address individual student needs. Diane, can you tell us a little bit about that?
In the specific case of PBIS, that was initiated and implemented at one facility to fill a behavior management program kind of deficit. They were looking for something that could be effective with our kids, and one staff spoke up and said, they're doing something interesting at my kid's school that I think we should take a look into, and proceeded to do that did a lot of research on PBIS, and that facility about 2 years ago, 2.5 almost now, began implementing the program. They initially did it without the support of any outside consultants, just relying on research and reading materials. But eventually they connected with Dr. Christine Jolivet. Once we made that connection and started having conversations with her, we decided to proceed with using PBIS at 3 other facilities in the state that were also in need of behavior management model. They had previously been using the old positive peer culture, which we found was less effective with our kids, as well as had some research that showed it as counterproductive with our population. So she agreed to work with us to provide some training and fidelity measurements for our programs. And as we proceeded along that path, we then learned that our leadership team across the division really was very interested in what was going on. And as they learned more and more, spoke with Dr. Jolivet themselves, were educated in the model, decided this would be a model. Again, as I said, we're trying to build some consistency from one site to another. We have 10 different state-operated secure facilities in the state, and we decided to implement this model at all of them with Dr. Jolivet's support. So that's what we're doing now. We've been in the implementation phase for Tier 1 for about 9 months at most facilities, a little bit longer at others, and we're reaching a level of fidelity that's probably going to allow us to move in the very near future to some Tier 2 tools and possibly Tier 3 down the road.
And Dan and Allison, turning to you, how has the adoption of PBIS gone at the facility level?
While I think I can speak for Allison when I say that while I think it's been a challenge simply from a time, an implementation standpoint, we are starting to see some results, albeit small results, but positive results. We are seeing buy-in from staff and youth. The basic philosophy of PBIS, be safe, be respectful, and be responsible, that's a daily challenge anyway with our youth. So if we can, the more tools that we can put into place with PBIS, the better. The more time we have to do that, the better. The more time we have to see what's working and what isn't working, the better.
Yes, I agree. I definitely, anytime you're implementing a new program, there's going to be, different hurdles and things that you need to tweak along the way. But I have seen amazing results so far with the PBIS. I know our youth are very bought into it. They look forward to being reinforced. They are able to tell you a little bit about the program and what we're doing, and they understand the expectations. And I think that's key. That's what we want. We're wanting to teach them these positive behaviors, and if they're able to tell you what it is that they need to be doing, that's what we want. And I think the staff has really seen the benefit of reinforcing them in the moment and being able to pass out the RISE cards and tell them, I appreciate how you were engaging in positive change with this, and being able to tell them about that. They've been able to see the confidence that it gives the youth and the change in the behavior.
And through its impact on behavior in the facility, do you think PBIS has in turn helped improve academic performance for students from your perspective, Allison?
I think we have seen that the youth, especially the teachers that are very consistent with the program, that the youth are probably more engaged, I would say, in their classroom. they understand the expectations. I think what I've seen with the teachers is they've been a lot more intentional about having their expectations posted and reviewing their expectations. And just through doing that, I believe that the behavior in the classroom is better. And whenever you're in a facility type of setting, you have to look at behavior first. There's no learning is going to occur when the youth aren't feeling safe or they're not feeling secure in the environment. So we definitely, with the improved behavior, we're definitely seeing more learning happening.
So, rounding out this discussion, what do you think have been the impacts of PBIS and other concerted efforts to meet students' unique needs, specifically for youth with special education needs?
I think the youth with IEPs buy into with PBIS. I think that this has been really great for them because it's very structured, and there's tangible reinforcers that they're able to get on a regular basis. And research shows that is really beneficial for our youth with special needs. So we've definitely seen improvement with those kids. I have seen, in particular, our younger youth or our youth maybe with some more immature social skills, they tend to really be responding well to our PBIS program.
Well, that's certainly good news. It sounds like PBIS has been one way in which Zebulon Pike and other facilities in Colorado have applied evidence-based principles to meeting the unique needs of youth in the facility, and with an eye towards those with some of the greatest needs, youth with learning and related disabilities. Diane, Dan, Allison, we really appreciate you taking the time to share some of what's going on in Colorado, and specifically at Zebulon Pike Youth Services Center. I know you're going to stick around to respond to some questions and comments, but thank you again.
Sounds good.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Nick.
Youth with learning and related disabilities that require special education services and supports can certainly pose a challenge to juvenile justice facilities and the schools within, from addressing academic deficits and behavior problems, not to mention the fact that these youth traditionally have negative previous school experiences. Facilities and their schools have to find ways to assess and address the unique needs of this population. As we've heard from Drs. Houchins and Mulcahy, research is exploring more in depth what does and doesn't work, and there are policies and practices that can make a difference for youth with special education needs. And Colorado is one state that has taken a proactive approach to apply best practices to meet needs, and we've heard from one facility the impact quality practices can have on youth and staff. There's a lot more to uncover around this topic. The U.S. Departments of Education and Justice just recently released a correctional education guidance package, and a key focus of that package was the responsibility of all state and public justice agencies to ensure quality special education services and supports to all students with disabilities. NDTAC and our partners will continue to explore and provide technical assistance on this topic, and we want to hear from you about what you feel is needed and what you've seen to be successful. To start that collaboration, we'll turn in just a moment to the extra credit portion of our program. Still with us are Drs. David Houchins and Candace Mulcahy, as well as Diane Skufka, Dan Balfus, and Allison Hansen. We encourage you to pose your comments and questions to them using the Q&A pod in the Adobe Connect window. And as those are coming in, just a quick reminder that this program will be archived on our website at neglected-delinquent.org. On the archive page, you'll find, in addition to the recording from today's program, a lot of additional information and resources from our guests. We encourage you to check it out. Also, we greatly value your feedback about this N&D InFocus program. While we're addressing your comments and questions, a very brief feedback form will be launched on your computer. We ask that you take just a few minutes to let us know what you thought of today's program. We'll also send a link to the form for those not able to complete it now. So, without further ado, let's turn to your comments and questions.